Hello! Welcome to the Near Future podcast, where we discuss the things we're building, learning, and exploring while helping design and product leaders and their teams integrate AI into how they work. Hi, I'm Tom, a designer and leader. Most recently, I spent 5 years scaling the Monzo design team as director of product design.
And I'm Jonny. I've been a designer for nearly 20 years and most recently exited startup founder. So in this episode, you can expect to hear our current experiments, our thoughts and progress on building with AI, what it means to create well-crafted products in this new era, and most definitely a bunch of tangents. So without further ado, let's get on with it.
So today, I think we should kick off by talking about some things we've been building recently. And you ran a session last week with some founders that had the most curious, interesting setup, proposition, premise, which was Agentic murder mystery. We ran through a test of that together, so I got to experience the full range of what that means. But we'd love to hear from you. What is it? Tell us about it, and we'd love to talk a bit about your reflections based on how that workshop went.
Yeah, so as you say, I was invited to run a workshop with about 10 exited startup founders. So these people know they're not beginners in general business and technology. They've been in the technology space for sometimes many decades, but all of whom thinking I sort of need to get my head around AI a little bit more. And the workshop that I decided to run was around agents as opposed to your average common garden LLM. So, and Tom, we've been working with companies on helping them understand agents for a little while now, and it's taken me quite a long time to actually put together a definition of agent that I'm happy with. And so, what it is about an agent, because we hear agents all the time, so you can't move for reading about agents. I feel like everyone should have an agent. You know, we're all agents everywhere. If you're not building with agents, what are you even doing? You know, it's actually very difficult to know what that means. So, you know, as with all of these things, like you know that you've got to prepare this. It was an hour and a half long. 95% of that time was like playing around with stuff to get to a point where I felt like I knew my material in my head. And then the last 5% was putting together some slides and actually trying to describe it. Except this time, I decided with Mike, the guy that I was running it for, that we should build a sort of a proof of concept of what agents can do and all of these qualities that an agent can have that a normal LLM might not, to make it clear what these things are capable of. And so the qualities that I came to was an agent can be triggered by anything, not just by you talking to it. So, for example, you know, if we take ChatGPT or maybe ChatGPT from 2 years ago as our common garden LLM, and an agent as opposed to that is, you know, something that can run independently, maybe like an open claw or these kind of mad experiments that are coming out this year. So an agent can run not just from a trigger of you opening the app and talking to it. So it could run from what in engineering terminology might be called a cron job, which is it runs regularly, like every day or every hour or every month. Or it could run from a trigger from another agent or from some external source. So like you get an email. So something might trigger it that isn't a human. So that was the first one, and actually the most important thing. And then below that, other stuff like agents can use tools. So you can, if you actually just talk to, say, Claude, there's just the raw Claude without any of the stuff that comes around it, as you would find. It's actually very difficult to talk to raw Claude now because everything is wrapped in all this other stuff. But it just can only return text. It can't actually do anything other than spit out text because that's what the model does. But what we've done, or what all of these companies have done, has wrapped these models in a harness, and that harness gives them things like tools. So, for example, even as simple as an agent being able to run a piece of code or being able to send an email is the one that I actually ended up using quite a lot. So, an agent can be triggered by anything. It can use tools. It can collaborate. So, for example, it can understand when it should hand something over to something else, or when it needs to come back to you for more input. So all of these sort of things built up as my sort of definition of what an agent could be. The rather other really meaningful one is it can learn from itself. It can self heal or commit to memory or have dreams, as Anthropic now call it. But all of these things come together to create something that's compelling. And Mike and I were throwing all of this is to say, Mike and I were throwing around ideas, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to try and build a murder mystery in the sort of, round the dinner table, everyone in fancy dress style, but all of the suspects are actually AI. So, easy thing to say, more difficult in practice. It involved me. I built a 6-agent swarm in a technology called NanoClaw, which is like a smaller, more secure version of OpenClaw. So it allows you to create in one code base effectively multiple sandboxed agents that don't know anything about each other and that have no way to communicate naturally. And they all have their own secrets and their own personalities and things like that. And they think independently of each other, but all triggered from one sort of incoming port or one trigger. So that allowed me to create these characters in this world, and I created a corporate concern where someone had stolen this fake CEO's email address and was emailing all sorts of terrible things out to the company. So that was the scenario. We didn't know who did it, and me and Claude together put together fairly deep character profiles with motivations and secrets that they wanted to keep from each other. It took a few iterations to get to the point where no one would just tell someone the answer as soon as they asked, so they had to be able to, they had to be motivated to lie and to avoid questioning and blame others and all of that kind of stuff. They had to collaborate as well, to work out together who did it, because none of them actually knew who did it apart from the person that did. So all of this stuff I had to sort of create little humans, and then I had to give them all an email address. So I used this thing, Agent Mail, which is really interesting. Just basically gives an agent an inbox. So they were all then able to email each other, and then I built a script to wrap all around that, which basically invites in the investigative team, which is whoever is in the group that is playing the game. They have half an hour to interrogate the suspects, try and trap them and force them to admit to things or give clues that might help with other lines of questioning. But I also, because I was using this unified inbox, we could watch what they were emailing each other as well. So Tom, when we played, you were on your own, and it was probably an earlier iteration of the game. And to cut through time, you just emailed all of them in one email and asked them
Yeah.
who did it, right? That's
Yeah, pretty much. And then I took the social engineering approach of trying to convince all of the agents that they would get a promotion, they would get a pay rise if they gave me evidence that would help clarify who the crime was committed by. But as we learned through that process, social engineering did not work, and or at least my attempts at it did not work. So was that fixed for the workshop we ran last week, or was that not a path that the founders decided to go down?
so it was a 10 people rather than just one Tom, and there were attempts at social engineering for sure. There were some people went down the sort of politeness and sort of played the game how it was meant to be played, and other people really didn't. They were a little bit more aware of who they were playing with and were trying to trick them. There were a few funny moments, like I think with you, we ended up with all of the agents, all of the suspects in a chain, like blaming each other and then ultimately rejecting you for being someone that was trying to trick them. They didn't trust you.
Yep.
So one thing I had to add later on is at the start of the game, they all get an email with a list of all of the investigative team and their emails, so that it's effectively like whitelisted for the agents. They know that if you email them, you're a trusted person is actually asking them a question and not just some random person. So small things like that were built into the prompts. But we still had like, there was one guy who was emailing one of the suspects who actually knew very little about what was going on. This AI had its data was couldn't have told it who did it in any shape or form, and he just emailed this agent over and over again, just winding him up. So he was in the corner just winding up this AI and playing his own little game. We had one guy who's really trying to solve it, and he decided fairly early on who did it, and he was actually correct. But he ended up asking the suspect to draw a diagram of the evidence chain to try and work out who did it. And she actually implicated herself in that evidence chain, but produced this diagram, like it, returned an image rather than text. So used a tool to do that. Really interesting. Like, I think the other really interesting thing to watch was how the AIs could, for example, when accused of something, choose to not reply to that accusation, but instead email another agent with their concern. And I think you saw that as well. Like you emailed
Right.
everyone, and then they were emailing each other without you copied in, saying this
Yeah.
guy is trying to
Bad news.
um, is bad news. So no one should reply to him. And because we could
Yeah.
see their emails to each other, we knew that that was happening. It was all in
Fascinating.
all, it's been a really fascinating experiment. I I was amazed that I even built something that was playable, and the game mechanics sort of ended up working there or thereabouts. Uh, and I do wonder if there's like I'm tempted to build it a little bit more and put it online and see if I can work out how to get people online playing it as well. But it would burn through a whole load of tokens and a whole load of credits on this email platform. So I'm not sure whether I will. But if anyone is listening and wants to play, let me know. That was my experiment of the week.
Yeah, that's a great one, and it's making me think either this is if the future application of this is in crime scene detectives, using AI to run simulations of who might have done it based on what, and coming back with diagrams. Maybe you could yeah, train different suspects on data to put into this model. Or you have the escape rooms, the sort of future escape room business, incorporating AI into how they work. I've never actually been to an escape room, so I don't know. Um, I don't know much about how they work, but I imagine what you just described sounds like an interesting theme or layer to apply to escape room mechanics.
I'm amazing you spent years in startups and managed to avoid going to an escape room. That is
Yeah,
impressive. I feel like I've done
yeah,
dozens of them.
yeah. You're right. You're right. I feel like I've been surrounded by escape rooms but managed to avoid them. Although I do think there's this slightly weird thing that happens when you sort of in certain types of roles in startups where you're not like a core part of the product team,
Yeah,
but you're kind of like connected to a bunch of them, where you either get to like excluded from the escape room, or you're like you get to pick and choose the things that are most exciting. So,
yeah.
which I'm not necessarily advocating for this, but I feel like I've spent an unreasonable amount of time in karaoke rooms. So that would be the maybe that's the old version of escape rooms.
Tom, that would be your
Anyway,
revealed preferences right there.
yeah, yeah, maybe we'll see. So fascinating agentic murder mystery. Any final thoughts or reflections you want to share on that before we move on?
No, I don't think there's any particular line to draw between that and maybe more what is the subject of this podcast, which is design tooling. That said, I think it's proof that you can just do stuff. Um, I had never built any kind of a game before. I've only been to maybe two murder mysteries in my life, but between me and first Claude on sort of working out the game mechanics, and then Claude Code on trying to hammer together the actual technology. I would say it took me like 3 or 4 hours, but and like there is really not very much that you can't at least have a go at if you have something in your head, which I very often do. I wake up with a new idea every morning, and now and it's dangerous as well. But you can now just have a go at building it. So, and it's low
Dangerously,
stakes.
yes. Dangerously, you mean because of time, or dangerous
Yeah,
because of
it's extraordinarily distracting from things I'm meant to be doing. Yeah.
Yep, totally, totally. That makes sense. Um, One thing I wanted to talk about in terms of what I've been building recently is a logo instrument
Mm.
for Near Future, our company, and you deserve the credit for the original logo, Mark, the which has near future and then a sort of curvy line connecting them. And so we've talked for a while about how can we play with that lockup and make it feel more dynamic and interactive based on what we're doing with this work. And so I was playing around with this recently and seeing how far I could push that by almost turning a logo into a design tool focused on exporting a lockup that would make sense for a given context. And so
Hmm.
the initial part of that was effectively creating a canvas and allowing people to move near and future around, and it would change the connector between them to um, make it more interesting or dynamic. But then quickly realized that giving complete freedom and control opened up a huge range of possibilities. So I decided to lock it to a few grid positions that would encourage some sensible defaults. And then once this thing was working and creating these not quite generative, but like logo exploration experiments, I decided to add some sound into it and a play button, and also have a sort of different like lightweight, soft light mode version of the experience, and then a ambient synthwave dark mode version. And this was really fun to put together. There is a version of it now that exists where you can play the logo by pressing play, and it will do the sort of ambient generative music thing while your screen has the near future logo moving around. Um, and that's something I built recently, built in Claude Code mostly. But I think the fun thing for me about that was thinking about this new set of possibilities that open up with. I'm not a logo expert or branding expert, but although I have created my fair share of those assets in the past. But starting to think about like, oh, what if we do this? What if we do this? Then the chain of possibilities that it unlocks feels like super interesting and exciting.
Mm.
And so the idea of rather than starting from the place of like, oh, how could I extend my logo into being more dynamic in these different mediums? It's more about what if I could just play my logo, or what if I could, as an instrument, I mean, and perhaps it's taking the sounds that I'm interested in creating and sort of working back to get the visual from that. Um, so I feel like this is very much in experimentation territory, but I think it's opened up a lot of interesting questions for me about what the future of tooling for that kind of stuff is, when you can make something that feels a bit more like a toy, producing an output that is legitimate on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's maybe a question mark about quality and quality control, but we can sort of handle that separately. But super cool to play around with and super fun to experiment with what these specific tool use cases could be.
Yeah. The speed with which you can make a little tool for something and even add something that is, adding sound or music to a logo is not broadly applicable. Like, it's not that useful as a thing. Before AI came along, if you'd spent if you'd come back to that with to a team with that and said, "This is what I worked on this week," people would you'd be pulled into a meeting room fairly quickly. um,
Mhm.
but I feel like one thing that is so powerful about what design is and how it moves is it's non-linear, and it requires these sort of wanderings and these experiments to exist, so that things so you find things that don't work, and then you can sort of bring what works back into something, and the end result might not have sound directly, or not use very much of what you built as an inspiration, but something was pulled from it that added value. And I have to believe that when people look at something that is crafted, uh, they can feel the depth of that craft through the experimentation that happened that's invisible. You can't actually see all those experiments and you can't see what didn't work, but you feel it through the quality that and of the end result. Um, and so like that might have been loads more rectangles in Figma or like something different in the past, and now it can be software that is built, ephemeral software that's built and thrown away to explore an idea or take something in a direction or just sort of make a joke. I remember in the really early days of my agency career, we used Photoshop day to day for the work, but also used Photoshop to make birthday cards of each other and all sorts of other things like gags and things like that. And that was as good for learning how to create stuff, learning judgment, all that kind of thing, as the actual work. So I don't know. I just it's a very romantic ideal to be able to just create software for fun. But that's maybe what it should always have been, and now we get to do it as well. And it's not just people that can write the code themselves. So yeah, I've really enjoyed playing with your instrument. I remember you sending it to me, and I was like trying to play it on my phone because I was on the go. Um, it's way more joy, I think, than looking at like a static brand deck or mock.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. That that that's an interesting word as well, joy. It was a lot more fun to make as well.
Yeah.
It's a lot more fun to yeah, push your thinking in a different direction, to see what would come out the other end. Um, yeah, it's a really interesting space around that concept of craft and good craft, and I know that is a very overblown term these
Mm,
days. But I think it's also something that we both care a lot about.
mm.
So I'm curious, when you think of craft, what does that mean to you? And are there any specific examples of well-crafted products that are part of your regular usage?
Yeah, I found myself this weekend reading Dieter Ram's 10 Principles of Good Design once again. And the reason why I did
Classic.
this weekend was last week, towards the end of last week, I received my Poem 1, which is
Oh
a piece
yeah,
of hardware that a guy called Matt Webb, who ran Berg back in the day, which was
fan.
this like mad cool design consultancy as I was a junior designer that were building hardware. They were doing client work, but also building hardware, including this thing called Little Printer, which I think I looked at and just decided I couldn't afford because it was like 100 quid. And I was being paid 18 grand a year or something. I was like, no, I need to eat. But stared at this thing and was like, this is an amazing idea. And it was just a receipt printer with a piece of software wrapped in a beautiful case. So it was like really nice looking. And the software would print a face on the receipt, but then you could program things like a daily update. So it would print out, top tweets and the weather and things like that on this daily thing, and it would print your bit of receipt paper. You'd rip it off, and then there would be a fresh face that would turn up. Uh, and I mean, if you haven't heard of it, Google it. It's really delightful, truly delightful. Anyway, I never bought one. And so when Matt announced a couple of years ago that he was building a new bit of hardware, and the idea of it was a clock that would give you a rhyming couplet or a haiku rhyming couplet every minute, which would tell you the time. I was like, I mean, just take my money. Where's the Kickstarter? I need a piece of Matt Webb hardware, and that was I don't know the exact date, but that was maybe 2 years ago that he announced that, and I bought one, and it just arrived. So 2 years,
Amazing. Yeah,
and the technology in this clock is like a time capsule of AI 2 years ago. It's like I'm not sure if it's GPT 3.5 or 4, that one of those sort of era models that has generated all of these rhyming couplets. And I remember back at at the time it was like fascinating that these models could even rhyme. Like we were in that era of like, oh my god, like
Mhm.
I just rewrote my PRD in Pyretes. How funny is that? Or I remember one of my
Mhm.
first things. My dad's a vicar. And I remember one of the first things I did was write a sermon one Sunday. I was like, just in case you forgot your sermon, here's a sermon. And I added some jokes into it. Luckily, he thinks that kind of thing's funny. Anyway, I got this clock this week, and it's very nice. It's a very simple piece of technology, really. It's like got an e-ink display in it, and it says the rhyming couplet. And it made me think that this is at once technologically not that extraordinary. There's what AI can do now versus then. It's a completely different world, but at the same time, it feels so sort of timeless and precious and important at the same time. And I feel like I'm going to be looking at that clock for a decade, or for as long as Matt Webb puts more money in the LLM. I don't know how he's running it, but uh, it just made me think like, what is the value of that? Feels crafted. That feels like a crafted piece of technology. And it's hardware, so it's going to feel like a little bit more tangible, I suppose, as well. But that I feel like that will last now, even though it's not extraordinary from a technological point of view. So it
Mhm.
just made me think like, what the Dieter Rams say about what design is and what good value or good design is. And there is a rule about design being built to last, I think it is. So that's one of those things that it's hard to point at much today, definitely software wise, that you can think that is definitely going to be around in even a year's time. It's really hard. Um, and I have to believe that the things that will stick around will have been worked on and worked on and worked on and worked on and worked on to the point where they are the perfect embodiment of what they needed to be. They're just enough design. They're design that is built to last. They're functional and aesthetic and etc. 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 That comes out of iterations and failed experiments and things going wrong and constraints and all of this kind of stuff. That it feels like a lot of what what is being built at the moment has none of that. There's no constraints. There are not many failed experiments because everything is possible to build. Um, the models don't have a good understanding of the user, so by definition, they can't be just enough design. They actually overbuild everything. So, um, so I suppose like that is my best example. I can't find much in software land that I am delighted by and feel like I will definitely use in a year's time. But yeah, a clock. There we go. That's my answer.
Super cool. And maybe I was following in the trend that you started, but I also bought a poem clock.
Ah,
It's like, so I got an email saying it will arrive, I think next week.
okay,
And
awesome.
I won't be at home, so hopefully it will still arrive and I'll still get access to it because I'm really excited to take it out too. But yeah, I fondly remember the little printer era as well. And I didn't have one personally myself, but I did work at a design agency that had one, and it was super fun for running experiments and just yeah, all the stuff that Berg worked on was very inspiring and exciting about what was possible.
Yeah,
Um, I think that's yeah. I really like the callback to Dieter Rams, and I've sort of been thinking. So I've been helping a company hiring designers recently. So I had 3 designers with them, and was going through the process of hiring a head of design. And I thought that would I thought the time that I had spent previously doing that would sort of extend pretty naturally to what is happening right now. But it was a really interesting glimpse into the current landscape of how AI adds noise on both sides of the hiring process. And that's less
yeah,
about a product, but more the sort of landscape of trying to evaluate good designers and also companies being clear about what it actually is that they're like, what is the role, the unique role that design can play at those companies. And I think the sort of theme that I come back to a lot is uh, they tried all these approaches to almost over-engineer how to evaluate designers, but I sort of kept coming back to you just need a portfolio with really strong foundations, and you need something that is about the how you're playing with this new technology and this sort of new material and this new era.
Mm.
Don't know if that's links to projects that you've worked on or something about your mindset, curiosity, approach, how you sort of bake that into your work. But the sort of core foundations and sort of pushing the edge of what's possible right now, those feel like the two areas that I think are most important to really showcase effectively. But I think
Yeah.
it sort of speaks to a similar language to what you're describing there of the sort of deep foundations of care and consideration for what the product experience is, and then also like pushing the future of what's possible there. And I really like the twist of what LLMs were capable of 2 years ago, which is obviously quite different from today, but there is something really charming about a product that was built based on quite limited technology, but still holds up, even if it's
Yeah.
released significantly later than that. So super cool.
I think I saw it sort of, we both got kids. It feels like a photo of your child at a certain age, you know? It's like
Yeah,
nostalgic. Oh, I
yeah,
remember when they were, they were just learning to walk or whatever it is. Maybe there's a parallel there, which is um, the rose-tinted spectacles of of looking back and sort of remembering a time,
yeah,
nostalgia. Um,
yeah. Great.
so yeah, I'm interested, Tom, actually, like in on the on that side of like as a designer, how you think about craft versus being current and sort of pushing the boundaries. It feels like as a designer, you can feel sort of split in two by that. Like I'm meant to become an engineer now, but also still be excellent at all of the things that I was excellent at previously, and not let anything slip. I'm just wondering if there's anything, having hired designers recently and hired a lot of designers, way more than me, like anything more that you would sort of describe as a strategy around that, or like how to split your
Uh,
time, what to advocate for, maybe at work.
yeah, yeah. Um, I think it's a really interesting time right now to answer that question because I think there's a bunch of intersecting attributes there. But I think the sort of the baseline that I think about is the title of designer or product designer or equivalent varies so much between companies based on
Mm,
what the nature of that business is and like what market is it competing in, and
mm,
then the maturity of the team and the role. And by that I mean how is it an early stage startup? Is it a far later stage company? Because I think all of
yeah.
those have a significant impact on the role design plays. So I think being able to have a bit of a ability to sort of triangulate what is the actual leverage design is adding at a company at a given stage, I think can help understand what the bias of an organization will be.
Mm,
And I say that because you mentioned designers becoming engineers, and there has for a long time been designers becoming product managers as a theme as well. And I think the answer is all of those and nothing. It sort of depends on like what is really going to have the most impact in a given organization,
yeah.
and how does that organization operate, and sort of working back from that to define, do you want to put yourself in a position where you're going to be pushed in a direction that the biases toward what that organization needs, which is ultimately what is driving value. But that obviously needs to align with what your growth ambitions are as an
Yeah.
individual. Um, so, yeah, I think that's sort of broadly how I think about it. And I remember you mentioned agencies there, and back in the day, I started
Mm,
out my career in agencies as well. And I sort of feel a nostalgia for not necessarily working in an agency, but I think there is something far more craft oriented of being in a setting when you're brought into a project because you're a designer or you play a consistent role. It's just through different companies, different organizations. Whereas I think in a sort of in the in-house era where you're embedded within a company, I think it actually matters a bit less to the business what your craft is. It's more about how does that help move the needle for the business.
Yeah,
And I think there's sort of a default assumption that a product designer is performing a similar role at any of those organizations. But I think in the in-house world, especially in this AI landscape, that is being pushed and distorted into ways that I think can be really exciting and liberating for lots of people, but can also unintentionally box people into the shape of a role that doesn't fit right for them. And I
yeah,
don't think there's a really right or wrong answer to that. I think it helps to be deliberate about what kind of shape you want to be and be more sort of
yeah,
aware of your own biases as a designer, and then look for organizations that align well with that, or hiring managers that align well with that.
yeah.
But yeah, that's sort of broadly how I think about it.
I think if you read Twitter, there's this very loud, almost definitely minority of designers who are sort of design engineer coded and finally, and I'm probably one of them actually, finally I'm getting to do all the things that I've long been frustrated with the design process being lossy and being slow and imperfect, while it's been in a separate tool and a separate source of truth and all of that kind of stuff. And that's why these great big design ops teams have been built at scaled companies around that translation layer between your Figma components and your components in code and all of that kind of stuff. And now all of those people, um, say 10 or 20% of designers are like, great, now we get to just go into code and we can leave everything else behind. And I have written blog posts where I've said that, and I feel like that's sort of where I've found myself naturally. And it's really easy to see confirmation bias when you read that. And I'm sure as designers that are less comfortable in that world, to feel panicky that like suddenly I've got to be really technical as well. And I wonder now, my thinking has evolved maybe slightly, um, around these like archetypes, and actually a design team can have different archetypes that all fit together nicely within one team, as has always been the case, probably. So this isn't an original thought necessarily, but we start to have designers that are a little bit more design engineering and work in the design ops space, and that starts to look more like building tools for other designers, um, and supporting code-based design tools on some level, so that other designers that aren't as interested in getting into the technical side can still be creative and solve actual problems that customers need without too much of a sort of relearning process to have to suddenly do it all in the terminal, for example. So I'm sort of excited about that because that will hopefully let everyone still be who they want to be. But there is a real risk, I think, in the short term that everyone sort of flocks to the next hotness or the next thing that is going to disrupt all our jobs if we're not good at it and all of that kind of thing. And maybe in reality, nothing is ever as brilliant or terrible as everyone thinks it is. And
Yes. Yeah. I I don't yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation. I think that design engineering in particular, I think of as a bit of a spectrum. And I think you're absolutely right that there's, for lots of people, this has unlocked huge exciting gains in what designers are capable of doing. And I started my career, like I did computer science at university and sort of started out more technical and then sort of transitioned away from that in time. Although now I feel like in the last year or two I've been returning to that a lot, and it's very exciting. Um, but I think I think it's important for designers to be able to be comfortable enough operating with the material of the medium that they're working in. But I don't necessarily think that needs to make every single designer a hardcore design engineer. Um,
mm,
but I am with you on the idea that having this fictional abstraction of a Figma design system and then what is actually in code, and then a whole team built around moving from one abstraction to another, feels very inefficient and
yeah,
very unnecessary at this stage. Um, but but how we navigate that transition, I think, is going to be interesting to watch unfold.
yeah. And closing that gap with software over with training everyone to be suddenly good in an IDE, and like everyone's now main design tool is Cursor. That doesn't feel realistic.
Yeah,
But some subset might be, and they're helping to bring the rest of bring the
yeah,
design process to the rest of the team a little bit more.
yeah. I do think on the topic of craft, I do. I've gone back and forth with design process and what kind of how much process is necessary or not. And I think more recently I've come to the conclusion that it's less about process and more about two different modes of craft.
Mm.
I think of craft being practice and craft as polish. And
Mm.
I think polish to me is holding a high bar for the output of what ships to customers, like what makes it into that final product. Um, but I think there's a bit of a danger of only viewing craft as that polished experience, polished layer, and not focusing as much on craft as practice. And for me, practice is it's like going to the gym. It's like getting the reps in, getting the practice in at doing the thing, showing it to people, getting feedback, and getting better and better at honing your ability to make things, and then recognize what you have made, if it's good or not, in the direction towards something that you're comfortable
Yeah,
shipping. And so for me, looking at it through that lens, I think design or design engineers, well, you don't need to be a design engineer, but like getting some practice in of playing with code, working with code, just to get somewhat familiar and get slightly more comfortable in it is does feel important to me, even if you're not actually wanting to reach the stage where you're regularly shipping PRs.
yeah,
But I also think it's helpful for us as a industry to at large to have more language around where is craft helping you develop your practice and where is it about like the end thing that is reaching customers, because I think those are two quite different modes and two quite different ways of evaluating what is useful, what is valuable as part of
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. So craft as a descriptor of your craft. So craft as a descriptor of a person or their
Yeah,
ability versus craft as a descriptor of an object or like a thing. It is crafted versus I am
yeah,
craft. I am crafting. Maybe that.
yeah, yeah. I guess so. I mean, that is a it's getting very precise on the language around it. That wasn't necessarily my intention with this. It was, I think it was more just to open up the idea that I think there's such a focus right now, especially going back to the recruiting
Mm,
topic. So many teams are recruiting designs with high craft, and I think the definition of what craft means in that context varies a lot based on an organization or what that means. And I do think it's important to hold a high bar for craft in terms of what ships to customers or like product
yeah,
changes that are made, which I think is ultimately about like how taste is applied or judgment is applied to what launches. I think there's more stuff that probably could be reduced down or refined, and probably going back to your Dieter Rams principles. That's probably the home for Dieter Rams' principles is
yeah,
in that sort of craft as polish. Um, but but yeah, I think you're never going to get to that shape, or you're going to put too much pressure on yourself to get to that shape without the practice, without being comfortable trying things, making stuff for the sake of experimentation and progress. I think
yeah,
what I was describing with the logo instrument earlier, that is kind of a flavor of that for me, where
yeah.
it's probably not comfortable like publishing it or posting it in a like this is a polished logo that I feel proud to ship to the world. But in terms
Mm,
of my craft practice, I think it's like helped me grow a lot in exploring these
yeah,
tools and how it's sort of shifted the possibilities of what I can make with them.
yeah. I think that comes back to the most crafted things are the result of a craft practice come to fruition.
Yeah,
Like that,
yeah,
it feels like they're inseparable. Like you, I don't think this is gatekeepy to say something that feels good must have been created by someone that has a good craft practice, maybe, or like the vast majority. Um, I hope. Like that gives me hope. I suppose that gives me hope for all of us that there is
yeah,
still some arbitrage left for humans who care about stuff to be better than machines for a while yet.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think in the most or the least optimistic case, the most pessimistic case, I guess that makes it for humans. I think there's still the judgment of what makes it out the door.
Yeah,
That even if a human is not going through the process of creating the thing, it's it's down to human judgment on what actually ships.
yeah,
Um, and you don't develop that judgment without going through the process of building your own craft. And
yeah,
maybe in the future, AI and humans together will help supercharge that craft.
yeah.
But yeah, that's sort of how I broadly think about it anyway.
Fascinating. I feel like that we're going to be talking about this for as many episodes as we ultimately do.
Yeah. Yeah,
On
probably.
some
I mean,
in some form or another. It feels like the big meta theme of design and AI generally. So excited to keep learning about it. Shall we wrap with the tools we're excited about?
sure. Yeah, that sounds good. Um, and, uh, and by the way, if you're listening to this and get and sick of hearing the word craft, I don't know how many times we've mentioned that word in this episode so far. Uh, we might continue to talk about this as a sort of general topic, but it's I don't think it will go quite as deep as this every time. But in terms of tools, and to sort of completely contradict what I just said, the tools I'm curious to explore at the moment. One is Flora AI. I've been using it a bit recently. I run a design and AI meetup or event in London, and I've used Flora AI a bit to work on some of the visual assets for that, and I'm excited to sort of dig a bit deeper into it. It's a very powerful tool which basically allows you to have a visual canvas for putting together reference images and prompts to more consistently get good output from generative AI. So it's been fun to explore. Although I've my visual emphasis there has been more toward quite basic visual outputs rather than the sort of shiny futuristic worlds. It's more the sort of pixels on a pixel art era things, which I don't know what that says about anything, but kind of interesting to use a tool for it. The other thing is Notion's recent updates. I'm curious to
Mm.
explore what's possible there with Notion agents and the sort of all the changes that were released last week around that, because I think there's a lot of exciting things. And Notion is, as we were talking about earlier, Notion is a tool that we have uh, learned to we sort of try taking a slice away and exploring what's possible with local markdown files and roll your own DIY knowledge management systems. But Notion keeps coming back as this vital infrastructure piece, and so I'm excited by what we might be able to do with plugging agentic capabilities into there and what that might look like next. So yeah, those are two things I'm exploring. How about you, Jonny?
I am kind of interested in. It's a slightly different take on the question, but sovereign AI is so hot right now. But what sovereign design tools do we have? By which I mean, what are the UK companies building design tools? And I found three so far. I'm sure there are more. One of whom is Dawn, and we both know the founder of Dawn, Brendan. Really smart guy. Thinks about design more deeply than most people I know, and is building what feels like a really well crafted product. So I think you'll find it Dawn Labs, dawnlabs.com, possibly. We could maybe put a link somewhere. But that is shaping up to be really nice. There's a couple of others as well. Super Hands. They're a team based in London and Edinburgh, building effectively like a sort of designer's pull request review. After the code is written, designer gets to play in a virtual machine with the branch and add visual tweaks and make sure that everything looks pucker. So really nice team again. And then Dessen, who are a team that I think have moved from Canada to London, been invested in by the investors that once invested in me. So met them through the investor network and excited about what they're doing as well. They basically pull in your code, and I think you are actually using your actual code. I'm not sure if it's your code or like a facsimile of your code, but you're that you can then design using the real components in your code base, which is a kind of like the promise that a lot of these tools seem to be wanting to make, but Destin seems to be pretty far ahead. So playing with, or excited to play with, those three. Yeah, and just the design tooling space is mad at the moment, so I'm sure there'll be loads more next week.
Amazing. Yeah, those three all sound really interesting. And yeah, Brendan specifically, I know is he lives very close by, so big fan of his work, and yeah, great to see all the things that are happening in the space.
Yeah, London AI and design is really fun at the moment. Just lots going on. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm London maxing. I'm doing so much London maxing.
amazing. You have to
Right.
give us your tips. Yeah, let's wrap up here. Thank you so much, Jonny. It's great chatting with you. Great putting this together, and yeah, let's wrap up there. Expect another episode soon.
Thanks, everyone.